Chosen one. Someone has carried a secret for so many years that even your soulmate never imagined the truth hiding inside their own family. The distance between you was never created by fate alone. Every missed message, every broken promise, every painful silence was carefully guided by a single pair of hands working in the shadows. And when that hidden truth finally comes into the light, the person everyone trusted the most will become the one nobody can ever trust again. Listen carefully. There was a time when neither you nor your soulmate understood why every path leading toward each other suddenly seemed to disappear. Every coincidence felt strangely designed. Every opportunity to meet dissolved at the last possible moment, and every attempt to reconnect ended with confusion instead of answers. You believed destiny was delaying the moment, while your soulmate quietly blamed themselves for losing the courage to fight harder, but neither of you realized another heart was secretly controlling the story from behind the curtain. Don't skip. Because the truth did not begin with hatred. It began with fear, and fear slowly transformed into selfishness until one family member became willing to sacrifice two innocent hearts simply to protect something they believed belonged only to them. That person smiled at family gatherings, offered comforting advice, and appeared to care deeply about everyone's future, yet every kind word concealed another carefully planned lie. Whenever your soulmate spoke your name, that family member would gently change the conversation. Whenever someone mentioned your future together, another excuse suddenly appeared. Nobody questioned these small moments because they looked harmless on their own, but together they formed an invisible wall that neither you nor your soulmate could understand. Far away, your soulmate often stared at old conversations that somehow ended without explanation. Messages disappeared. Calls went unanswered. Important words were delayed until they no longer mattered. Sometimes your soulmate wondered if you had simply changed your mind, while you wondered whether they had forgotten every promise ever made. The pain grew silently because both of you respected each other enough not to accuse the other without proof. That silence became the perfect weapon for someone who understood that misunderstandings could destroy love much faster than open conflict ever could. The family member watched everything patiently, never rushing, never exposing themselves, always choosing the perfect moment to interfere. They knew that if they pushed too hard, suspicion would grow. So instead they planted tiny doubts one after another until those doubts became stronger than hope itself. Every delayed meeting looked like bad timing. Every broken plan appeared accidental. Every emotional distance seemed natural. Nobody could see the invisible hand moving every piece across the board. Don't skip. Years before either of you understood what was happening, that same family member had already decided you could never become part of their family's future. It was not because you lacked kindness, loyalty, or love. In fact, those qualities frightened them the most. They believed that once your soulmate truly chose you, their own influence inside the family would slowly disappear. They feared losing control over important decisions. They feared losing financial advantages. They feared becoming less important in the eyes of the people around them. Their selfish gain became more valuable than someone else's happiness, and once that decision settled inside their heart, every action afterward became part of a carefully written plan. They never shouted. They never threatened anyone openly. Instead, they mastered the dangerous art of quiet manipulation. They whispered half-truths instead of complete lies. They encouraged unnecessary doubts. They exaggerated innocent misunderstandings. Every sentence sounded reasonable enough to believe, yet every sentence moved your soulmate one small step farther away from you. Meanwhile, strange things continued happening around your own life. People who once encouraged your relationship suddenly became distant. Invitations somehow never reached you. News about your soulmate arrived unusually late, often after important moments had already passed. There were nights when you felt an overwhelming urge to contact them, only to convince yourself they probably no longer wished to hear from you. At almost the exact same moment, your soulmate experienced the same emotional battle, believing you had chosen a different future without them. Neither of you realized those painful assumptions were exactly what someone had hoped would happen. The family member understood something few people ever recognize. If two people stop believing they are loved, they eventually stop trying to reach each other. That cruel understanding became their greatest weapon. One evening, your soulmate accidentally overheard a conversation that lasted only a few seconds. Two older relatives were discussing something that suddenly stopped the moment they noticed someone entering the room. One sentence, however, escaped before the silence returned. "If that old secret ever comes out, everything will fall apart." Those words refused to leave your soulmate's mind. At first they believed the conversation concerned money, inheritance, or another private family issue, but deep inside their heart an uncomfortable feeling continued growing stronger every single day. Something was missing. Too many events from the past no longer made sense. Too many emotional wounds seemed strangely connected. Every memory slowly returned carrying new questions that had never existed before. Why had certain meetings always been cancelled? Why had certain relatives reacted so strangely whenever your name appeared? Why had every attempt to rebuild the relationship somehow failed before it even truly began? Those questions refused to disappear. Don't skip. Across the following weeks your soulmate quietly began paying attention instead of blindly accepting every explanation given by the family. They noticed nervous expressions that had never mattered before. They noticed one particular family member constantly changing subjects whenever your future was mentioned. They noticed hidden tension during conversations that should have been completely ordinary. Most importantly, they noticed that the same person always seemed strangely relieved whenever another obstacle appeared between the two of you. That relief was small, almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore once seen. It was the expression of someone protecting a secret instead of sharing another person's pain. For the very first time, your soulmate wondered whether the greatest obstacle had never been destiny at all. Perhaps the real obstacle had been sitting inside the family home every single day, pretending to support everyone while secretly controlling everything. The answers, however, still remained locked away inside an old wooden cabinet that nobody had opened for years. Hidden beneath forgotten photographs, expired documents, and fading family letters rested one small envelope carrying a date from long ago. On its front, written in careful handwriting, were only a few simple words that immediately caused your soulmate's hands to tremble. Those words were not addressed to any parent, sibling, or relative. They were about you. And the moment your soulmate slowly reached for that envelope, the same family member suddenly appeared behind them with fear written across their face for the very first time, desperately saying only one sentence: "Don't open that. Because if you read what's inside, you'll finally know what I did." Your soulmate slowly turned toward that frightened family member, and in that single moment something felt completely different. For years this person had always spoken with confidence, always had an explanation ready for every question, and always seemed certain that everyone would believe every word they said. But now their voice shook, their breathing became uneven, and their eyes remained fixed on the old envelope instead of your soulmate. It was no longer the reaction of someone protecting an old memory. It was the reaction of someone terrified that years of carefully hidden deception were only seconds away from collapsing forever. Your soulmate tightened their grip around the envelope without saying a single word. Silence filled the room so heavily that even the ticking clock on the wall suddenly sounded unbearably loud. The family member stepped forward once more and quietly whispered that some truths should remain buried because reopening the past would only create more pain for everyone involved, but those words no longer sounded wise or protective. They sounded desperate. They sounded like the final attempt of someone who knew they were losing control. Don't skip. Because the next few minutes would reveal that almost every painful misunderstanding separating you and your soulmate had been quietly engineered by the very person who had spent years pretending to keep the family together. Your soulmate looked directly into their eyes and calmly asked a question that had never been asked before. If this envelope contains nothing important, then why are you so afraid of me reading it? No answer came. Instead, the family member slowly lowered their head, and that silence became louder than any confession they could have spoken. With trembling hands, your soulmate carefully opened the envelope. Inside rested several folded pages, each carrying dates from different years. At first they appeared to be ordinary handwritten notes, but after reading only the first few sentences your soulmate felt their heartbeat quicken. The pages described conversations that had supposedly happened between you and your soulmate, yet many of those conversations had never actually taken place. Someone had deliberately rewritten the truth, creating a false history designed to convince other relatives that you had lost interest, become unreliable, and slowly walked away. Some pages claimed you had refused invitations you had never received. Others insisted you had ignored important messages that had never reached your phone. There were even records suggesting you had openly admitted wanting a completely different future, although those words had never come from you. Every fabricated detail had one purpose: to slowly convince the family that separating the two of you was the most reasonable decision. Your soulmate could hardly breathe while reading each page because every false memory explained another unanswered question from the past. Every unexplained silence suddenly had a hidden cause. Every broken promise had been carefully manufactured by someone who understood exactly how trust could be destroyed without ever appearing guilty. Don't skip. As your soulmate continued reading, another folded document slipped onto the floor. It was much older than the rest and carried a familiar signature. The moment they recognized it, their entire body froze. It was a letter you had written years earlier, a letter filled with honesty, hope, and unwavering love. You had explained that no matter how difficult life became, you were willing to wait because you believed the connection between your hearts deserved patience rather than fear. Yet as your soulmate reached the final paragraph, they realized something heartbreaking. The last page was missing. Someone had removed it. Without that final page, the entire meaning of your letter had changed. Instead of sounding hopeful, it appeared incomplete, uncertain, and almost like a farewell. Suddenly everything made sense. Your soulmate remembered being shown only this incomplete version years ago. At the time they had believed you were quietly giving up, and although it broke their heart, they forced themselves to accept what they thought was your decision. They never imagined someone had physically removed the page that contained your true promise. The missing page had not disappeared by accident. It had been stolen because it contained the one sentence capable of destroying the manipulator's entire plan. Your soulmate slowly lifted their eyes toward the family member standing across the room. Tears filled their eyes, not only because of the lies, but because of the years that had been stolen from both of you. Every lonely birthday, every silent holiday, every night spent wondering whether the other person still cared. Every painful attempt to move forward while secretly hoping fate would somehow reconnect your paths. None of it had been necessary. None of it had happened because love had failed. It had happened because someone else's selfish gain had become more important than two innocent hearts. The family member finally spoke. But instead of denying everything, they quietly admitted that they believed they were protecting the family's future. They claimed that your soulmate would eventually forget you, marry someone else, and build a stable life that benefited everyone. They insisted they had never expected the love between you to survive for so many years. But the more they spoke, the clearer their selfishness became. Every explanation revolved around what they wanted, what they feared losing, and what they believed the family deserved. Not once did they mention what you or your soulmate truly wanted. Their decisions had never been acts of love. They had always been acts of control disguised as concern. Don't skip. For several long minutes nobody spoke. The room remained painfully quiet until another elderly relative slowly entered after hearing raised voices. They looked at the scattered papers covering the table, recognized the handwriting immediately, and closed their eyes with deep regret. Before anyone could ask another question, that elderly relative whispered something that shocked your soulmate even more. I warned them years ago that one lie would eventually require 100 more. Those words changed everything. It meant this had never been one impulsive mistake. It had been a carefully maintained deception stretching across many years, growing larger every time another truth had to be hidden. The elderly relative admitted they had discovered pieces of the deception long ago but had remained silent out of fear that exposing the truth would destroy the family forever. Instead, their silence had allowed the lies to grow stronger until they controlled everyone's lives. Tears rolled down their face as they apologized for choosing peace over honesty. Your soulmate listened without interruption, realizing that sometimes silence can become just as damaging as deception when it protects injustice instead of truth. As the evening slowly faded into darkness, your soulmate gathered every document, every letter, and every remaining piece of evidence into one small stack. There was no anger left on their face now. Only determination. They quietly walked toward the front door, leaving behind every voice calling their name. The frightened family member begged them not to leave, warning that reopening the past would shame the entire family and destroy relationships that could never be repaired. Your soulmate stopped for only a second before answering with complete calmness. The family was never destroyed by the truth. It was destroyed the day someone decided to replace love with manipulation. Then, without looking back, they stepped outside into the cold night carrying the evidence that could finally reunite two lives that had been separated for years. But just as they reached the gate, their phone suddenly vibrated with a message from an unknown number containing only one chilling sentence. If you tell you the truth tonight, another secret about your family will be exposed as well. Your soulmate stood frozen after seeing the familiar figure waiting in the shadows. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried the weight of years filled with unanswered questions, stolen memories, and broken trust. The family member slowly stepped forward, no longer wearing the confident smile that had hidden the truth for so long. Their face showed exhaustion, fear, and regret, yet your soulmate no longer saw them as someone who deserved immediate forgiveness. Every painful year that had separated you both flashed through their mind like scattered pieces of a story finally falling into place. Don't skip. Because this was the moment when the person responsible for so much suffering finally realized they had lost the one thing they had spent years trying to protect: everyone's trust. In a trembling voice they admitted there was still one final truth that nobody had discovered. The letters, the missing pages, the fake messages, and the manipulated conversations were only part of the plan. The biggest lie had never been written on paper at all. It had been spoken directly to you and your soulmate on different occasions, convincing each of you that the other had willingly chosen a different future. Those conversations never happened naturally. They had been carefully arranged, with words changed just enough to destroy hope without creating suspicion. Every lie had been designed to make love slowly fade on its own so that no one would ever suspect another person's interference. Your soulmate listened without interrupting, allowing every confession to settle in complete silence. They remembered countless nights wondering why you had suddenly become distant. They remembered convincing themselves that if you truly wanted to be together, you would somehow find a way. At exactly the same time, you had been carrying the same heartbreaking belief, never realizing someone else had quietly built an invisible wall between both of you. The family member finally admitted that they had intercepted important messages, discouraged relatives from helping, hidden invitations, and even persuaded others that keeping you apart would benefit the family. Every selfish decision had been justified by claiming they were protecting stability, reputation, and future prosperity. But beneath every excuse was the same hidden desire: to remain the person with the greatest influence over your soulmate's life. They feared that once true love entered the family, their control would disappear forever. That fear slowly became obsession, and obsession eventually became deception. By the time they recognized the damage they had caused, too many lies had already been told to reveal the truth without destroying everything around them. Instead of admitting their mistake, they continued adding one lie after another until the entire family unknowingly became part of a story that had never been real. Don't skip. Your soulmate quietly opened the final envelope and unfolded the missing page that had finally been recovered. The words written there immediately filled their eyes with tears. Your promise had never been a goodbye. It had been a vow that no matter how much time passed, you would never stop believing that one day the truth would bring both of you back together. That single page changed every painful memory. Every moment your soulmate believed you had abandoned the relationship suddenly disappeared beneath the overwhelming realization that you had never stopped caring. They pressed the page against their heart for several long seconds before looking directly at the family member. There was no anger left in their voice now, only deep disappointment. They quietly said that money could be earned again, family status could be rebuilt, and reputation could recover with time, but the years stolen from two innocent hearts could never be returned. No apology, no explanation, and no excuse would ever give those lost years back. The family member lowered their head, unable to deny a single word. For the first time, they understood that the greatest price of selfishness is not what a person gains, but what they can never restore after the truth is finally revealed. Without saying another word, your soulmate turned away and continued walking toward the place where they believed they would finally find you. Every step felt lighter than the one before because the burden of uncertainty had finally disappeared. They no longer wondered whether you had forgotten them. They no longer questioned whether your love had ever been real. Now they carried something far stronger than doubt. They carried the complete truth. Yet just as they reached the entrance, an elderly woman quietly approached and handed them a small, weathered photograph she had kept hidden for years. In the picture, you and your soulmate were smiling together, completely unaware that someone standing just behind the camera had already begun planning the deception that would separate your lives. Written on the back of that photograph was a sentence that made your soulmate's hands tremble one last time. The day this photo was taken, the plan to keep you apart had already begun. Your soulmate stared at the old photograph for what felt like an eternity. Every smile captured within it suddenly carried a meaning that had been invisible for years. It was not just a memory of happier days, it was proof that the betrayal had begun long before either of you noticed the first signs of distance. The elderly woman gently explained that she had kept the photograph hidden because she had always sensed something was terribly wrong, but fear had prevented her from speaking sooner. She confessed that on the very day the picture was taken, she overheard the family member quietly telling someone, "If they stay together, everything I've planned will disappear." At the time she believed those words were spoken in anger and would soon be forgotten, but as the years passed and the strange misunderstandings continued multiplying, she realized those words had become reality. Don't skip. Because your soulmate finally understood that this had never been a series of unfortunate coincidences. Every delay, every argument, every unanswered message, every broken opportunity had been carefully placed like pieces of a puzzle designed to keep two hearts forever separated. Holding the photograph tightly, your soulmate thanked the elderly woman and continued searching for you. Their heart no longer carried confusion, it carried urgency. They knew every additional hour spent in silence was another hour stolen by someone else's selfish choices. Meanwhile, inside the family home, the person responsible for the deception sat completely alone for the first time in years. The house that had once echoed with conversation now felt painfully empty. Other relatives had begun questioning everything they had been told. Old memories were returning. Small details that once seemed meaningless suddenly fit together perfectly. One relative remembered being asked not to invite you to a family celebration. Another remembered being told you had already declined. Someone else recalled deleting a message because they were falsely informed you no longer wished to remain in contact. Piece after piece, the truth spread through the family until nobody could deny what had happened. The lies had survived for years only because each person had unknowingly held one tiny piece of the deception. Now those pieces were finally coming together. Don't skip. Late that afternoon, your soulmate arrived at the quiet place where you often found peace whenever life became overwhelming. They looked around with nervous eyes, hoping fate had guided them correctly. For several moments there was nothing but silence, the gentle movement of the wind, and distant birdsong. Then, slowly, they saw a familiar figure standing farther ahead. Their heart nearly stopped. Years had passed, yet somehow they recognized you instantly. Every memory returned at once. Every promise, every dream, every unanswered question. Your soulmate took one hesitant step forward, but before they could speak, they noticed something in your hands. It was an old notebook, the very notebook where you had spent years writing thoughts you never believed anyone would read. As your eyes met, neither of you rushed forward. Neither of you spoke immediately. Some silences are too meaningful to interrupt with hurried words. Instead, your soulmate slowly reached into their bag, removed the recovered letter, and held it out with trembling hands. "I finally know the truth," they whispered. "And I'm here because I should have learned it years ago." You looked at the letter without touching it. The pain of the past had taught you to protect your heart, and trust was not something that could return in a single moment. Even so, something inside you recognized the sincerity in your soulmate's voice. They began explaining everything: the hidden envelope, the missing page, the false messages, the confession, the diary, and the years of manipulation carried out for selfish gain. They admitted every mistake they had unknowingly made by believing those lies, and accepted responsibility for not searching harder when everything first began falling apart. There were no excuses, no attempts to shift blame, only honest regret. As they finished speaking, tears quietly rolled down both of your faces because the truth was far more painful than either of you had imagined. Love had never disappeared. It had simply been buried beneath years of deception created by someone who valued control more than happiness. Just as it seemed the truth had finally been spoken, another car suddenly stopped nearby. Several members of your soulmate's family stepped out one by one, each carrying expressions of guilt and determination. They had come because they had discovered something even more shocking after your soulmate left the house. Hidden inside an old locked drawer was one final document that nobody had seen before. The oldest relative held it carefully in both hands and said with a trembling voice, "We thought we already knew everything. But this changes the entire story." Your soulmate slowly turned toward the document, unaware that what was written on those aging pages would reveal that the selfish family member had not acted alone. And another trusted person had secretly helped keep you both apart from the very beginning. Your soulmate accepted the old document with trembling hands while every family member stood in complete silence, afraid of what the next few moments might reveal. The paper looked older than every letter discovered so far, its edges worn by time, its ink beginning to fade, yet one thing remained perfectly clear. Several signatures appeared at the bottom instead of just one. Until that moment, everyone had believed a single selfish family member had manipulated the truth alone, but now it became painfully obvious that another trusted relative had quietly helped protect the deception from the very beginning. Don't skip. Because sometimes the deepest betrayal is not committed by the person who creates the lie, but by the one who knows the truth and chooses to protect it. Your soulmate slowly began reading each page aloud. The document described private conversations held years earlier after certain relatives became convinced that your relationship would reduce their influence over important family decisions. They feared losing control over financial matters, family expectations, and the future they had already imagined for themselves. Instead of allowing love to decide its own path, they secretly agreed to interfere little by little until the connection between you and your soulmate slowly disappeared without anyone realizing. Another hand had been guiding every painful event. It was never supposed to become a lifelong separation. Their original plan was to create temporary distance until your soulmate accepted another future, but when that did not happen, they continued lying because admitting the truth became more frightening than continuing the deception. The oldest relative quietly admitted that years ago they had accidentally discovered part of this agreement hidden inside an old drawer. They wanted to expose everything immediately, but another family member begged them to remain silent, promising the truth would eventually come out naturally. That promise had never been kept. Instead, the silence grew stronger, the lies multiplied, and every passing year made confession seem impossible. Tears filled the eyes of relatives who had unknowingly repeated false stories, believing they were helping the family. One after another they apologized, realizing they had become pieces of a plan they never fully understood. Nobody could erase the lost years, but for the first time every voice in the family spoke the same truth instead of repeating carefully planted misunderstandings. Your soulmate looked toward you with deep regret and quietly said that if they had questioned those stories sooner instead of accepting them, perhaps none of this suffering would have lasted so long. You gently shook your head because blame alone could never rebuild what had been broken. The only thing capable of changing the future was complete honesty from this moment forward. Don't skip. The relative who had secretly helped protect the deception finally stepped forward. Unlike the first confession, this one came without excuses. Their voice trembled as they admitted they had destroyed letters, hidden invitations, and even convinced mutual friends not to interfere because they believed separating the two of you would keep the family united. Instead, the opposite happened. The family had become divided by secrets, fear, and guilt. Looking directly at you, they admitted something nobody expected. During all those years they had secretly watched your life from a distance, expecting you to eventually move on and forget everything. But every time they heard your name, they also heard stories about your kindness, your patience, and your refusal to speak bitterly about the past. Those stories slowly became the greatest burden on their conscience because they realized the person they had tried to remove from the family's future had never wished harm upon anyone. At that moment, the weight of their choices finally became impossible to carry. They apologized not because they wanted forgiveness, but because they could no longer live with the truth trapped inside their heart. A long silence followed before your soulmate carefully unfolded the final page of the recovered document. At the bottom, beneath every signature and every hidden agreement, someone had written a single sentence that nobody else had noticed before. The handwriting belonged to the elderly relative whose diary had warned about the danger years earlier. The sentence read, "The truth may be delayed, but one day love will return to the place where fear once lived." Those words changed the atmosphere completely. For the first time since this painful journey began, hope felt stronger than regret. Your soulmate slowly reached for your hand, not demanding trust, not expecting immediate forgiveness, but offering complete honesty instead. You looked into their eyes and realized they were no longer standing before you with unanswered questions. They were standing before you carrying every hidden truth, every recovered letter, every confession, and every promise that nothing would ever again be hidden between you. Just as everyone believed the entire mystery had finally come to an end, the elderly woman who had first handed over the old photograph quietly opened a small wooden box she had carried with her all along. Inside lay a sealed envelope covered with dust. She looked at both of you and whispered, "I was told to give you this only after every lie had been exposed." Your soulmate carefully turned the envelope over and noticed that it was addressed to both of you together, not separately. On the back, written in elegant handwriting that neither of you recognized, were 7 unforgettable words. The person who started all of this wasn't family. The words written across the back of the envelope echoed through the silence with almost unbelievable weight. For several moments nobody reached for it. Everyone had spent the last few days believing the mystery had finally been solved, believing every hidden lie had already been uncovered, yet those 7 simple words shattered that certainty in an instant. If the person who started everything was not actually a member of the family, then every confession made so far had only revealed how the deception had continued, not where it had truly begun. Don't skip. Because sometimes the first lie is planted by someone who quietly disappears, leaving others to carry the consequences for years without fully understanding how they became part of the story. The elderly woman slowly explained that she had protected the envelope because she had made a promise long ago to the person who entrusted it to her. They believed the truth would only be understood after every family secret had already been exposed. Until then, revealing it would have created even greater confusion. Your soulmate carefully broke the old seal while every relative watched in complete silence, their hearts filled with equal parts fear and curiosity. Inside rested several yellowed pages along with a single faded photograph. The picture showed a gathering from many years earlier, taken long before anyone imagined that love, trust, and family would become entangled in such painful deception. Standing near the edge of the photograph was a familiar face that almost everyone recognized, yet nobody had spoken about that person in years. It was someone who had once been welcomed by the family, someone whose advice had always been respected, someone who was not related by blood but had earned extraordinary influence over important decisions. As your soulmate continued reading the letter, the pieces finally began fitting together. Years earlier, that trusted outsider had quietly convinced certain relatives that your presence would eventually divide the family, weaken their position, and change the future they had carefully planned. They had never openly demanded that anyone separate you both. Instead, they planted fear inside vulnerable hearts and allowed fear to grow into suspicion. Once those doubts took root, the family member who later confessed had unknowingly carried the plan forward, believing they were protecting everyone they loved. The manipulation had begun outside the family, but it survived because selfishness inside the family gave it a place to grow. Don't skip. The letter also contained something nobody expected, a handwritten apology from the outsider themselves. They admitted that years earlier they had been driven by jealousy after witnessing the deep connection between you and your soulmate. They believed that if they could prevent your future together, certain opportunities would remain under their own control. What began as a selfish attempt to influence one decision slowly became a chain of lies they could no longer stop. Before leaving forever, they confessed everything in writing, hoping that one day the truth would reach both of you, even if they never had the courage to return and speak those words themselves. The room fell completely silent. No one celebrated the discovery because there was nothing joyful about learning how easily fear, jealousy, and selfish ambition had stolen years that could never be recovered. Every relative slowly realized that although someone else had started the deception, each person who repeated a lie without questioning it had unknowingly helped keep the distance alive. Your soulmate folded the letter with extraordinary care before turning toward every member of the family. There was no anger left in their eyes. The endless search for someone else to blame had finally come to an end. They quietly explained that continuing to live inside bitterness would only allow the past to keep controlling the future. The truth had finally been revealed. Every hidden letter had been recovered. Every missing page had been found. Every confession had been spoken. Now only one decision remained, whether to allow those painful years to define the rest of your lives or to let honesty become the beginning of something entirely new. Looking directly at you, your soulmate admitted that they could not erase what had happened, nor could they ask you to forget the years of loneliness created by other people's choices. They could only promise that from this day forward, no secret, no fear, and no outside influence would ever again be allowed to stand between your hearts. As everyone prepared to leave, the oldest relative quietly smiled through tears and looked toward the evening sky. The truth arrived much later than it should have, they whispered, but it arrived before hope completely disappeared. Those words settled gently over everyone present. The weight that had burdened the family for so many years finally began to lift, not because every wound had instantly healed, but because every hidden shadow had finally been brought into the light. And as you and your soulmate slowly walked away together, carrying nothing except the recovered letters and the truth that had survived every lie, every person standing behind you understood one unforgettable lesson: a selfish plan can delay two hearts for years. But it can never permanently defeat a love that refuses to surrender to the truth. Even after the truth had finally been revealed, neither you nor your soulmate believed that healing would happen overnight. The years that had been stolen could never be returned, and both of you understood that rebuilding trust would require something far stronger than emotional words. It would require honesty repeated every single day. As you walked together beneath the quiet evening sky, neither of you tried to pretend the pain had never existed. Instead, you spoke openly about every unanswered question that had lived inside your hearts for so many years. Your soulmate admitted how many nights they had secretly hoped destiny would somehow cross your paths again, even while convincing themselves that you had chosen a different future. You quietly confessed that there had been moments when you almost gave up completely, yet something deep inside always refused to believe your story had truly ended. That invisible hope had survived every lie, every misunderstanding, and every painful silence. Don't skip. Because the greatest victory was never exposing the people who had separated you. The greatest victory was discovering that genuine love had remained alive beneath years of deception without either heart becoming filled with hatred. Over the following weeks, the family slowly began facing the consequences of the choices that had divided everyone for so long. Conversations that had once been avoided were finally spoken aloud. Relatives apologized to one another for believing rumors without searching for the truth. Old photographs were returned to their rightful place. Forgotten letters were carefully preserved instead of hidden. Every missing piece of the past was restored one by one, not because anyone wanted to relive the pain, but because nobody wanted another generation to inherit the same silence that had nearly destroyed two innocent lives. The family member whose selfish decisions had caused so much suffering accepted responsibility without asking for immediate forgiveness. They understood that forgiveness is never something a person can demand after breaking another person's trust. It can only be offered freely when the wounded heart is finally ready. That realization became the beginning of their own transformation. For the first time in many years, they stopped trying to control everyone else's future and finally accepted responsibility for their own past. Don't skip. One quiet afternoon, the elderly woman who had protected the final envelope invited both of you to visit her one last time. She carefully opened another small wooden box and smiled gently before placing it on the table. Unlike the previous discoveries, this box contained no shocking secrets, no hidden confessions, and no forgotten evidence. Inside rested only two simple objects, a small silver key and an old handwritten note. The note read, "Every family keeps doors locked by fear. Only truth has the key to open them. The elderly woman explained that she had waited years to see this moment because she believed every painful story deserved an ending built upon wisdom instead of revenge. She reminded both of you that exposing the truth was never meant to destroy a family. It was meant to free it from the weight of lies. Those words remained in your hearts long after you left her home, becoming a promise that no future disagreement would ever again be hidden beneath silence or manipulation. As seasons quietly changed, people who once whispered false stories began telling a completely different one. They spoke about the remarkable way two hearts had survived years of separation without losing their kindness. They spoke about the danger of allowing fear to make decisions that belong to love. They spoke about how a single selfish choice can echo across many lives, while a single courageous truth can begin healing them all. Your story became a reminder that real love is not measured by how easily two people remain together, but by whether honesty still finds its way back after everything else has failed. The scars of the past never completely disappeared, but they no longer controlled the future. Instead, they became quiet reminders of the importance of trust, patience, and courage. And years later, whenever someone asked how two people could remain connected after so much time apart, your soulmate would simply smile, look at you with grateful eyes, and answer with the same unforgettable words. Lies separated us for years, but the truth never stopped finding its way back to us.